Hey guys, tonight we journey back to the bustling, aromatic, and sometimes perilous streets of 16th century Constantinople, where a new kind of establishment is just beginning to brew. Imagine a city vibrant with trade, intrigue, and the call to prayer, suddenly captivated by a dark, bitter drink from foreign lands. You're about to step into the world of the first Ottoman coffee houses, the Kavahain, places where empires were subtly shaped, one conversation at a time. And let's be honest, if you were suddenly plonked back there with your 21st century sensibilities and a craving for a caramel macchiato, you probably wouldn't survive the initial shock or the coffee. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd also love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. So, drop that in the comments below. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey doesn't begin with a grand archway or an embossed invitation, but with a subtle shift in the city's rhythm, a new scent weaving its way through the familiar symphony of smells that is Constantinople in the mid-1500s. This is a city at the peak of its imperial majesty, the heart of the Ottoman Empire, a sprawling metropolis that straddles two continents. You're walking through streets teeming with life, merchants from Venice and Ragusa haggling over silks and spices, stern-faced janissaries marching in their distinctive caps, veiled women gliding towards the covered markets, and the ever-present calls of street vendors selling everything from fresh figs to intricately painted ceramics. The air is thick with the scent of the sea from the Golden Horn, the charcoal smoke from countless braziers, the sweet perfume of rosewater from the grander houses, and the earthy aroma of baking bread. Social life for men largely revolves around the mosque courtyards for pious reflection. The boisterous, sometimes rowdy, atmosphere of the mayhanes or taverns often run by non-Muslims and serving forbidden wine on the sly, or the steamy communal intimacy of the public baths, the hammams. Business is thrashed out in the bustling bedestins and hans, the great commercial complexes. But something is missing. A space for casual, sober congregation, for unhurried talk that isn't about closing a deal or fulfilling a religious duty. Then, it arrives. Not the coffee itself, as the beans had been trickling in for a while, but the idea of a place dedicated to its consumption. The year is around 1554, maybe 1555. The exact date is a bit fuzzy. A classic historians still argue whether. Moment for the pedants among us. Two Syrian gentlemen, one Hakim from Aleppo and a certain Shams from Damascus, are generally credited with opening the very first public coffee houses in the bustling commercial district of Tadakale, down near the Spice Bazaar. A stone's throw from the Grand Bazaar's cacophony. Imagine the scene, you, a curious local. Hear whispers of a new kind of establishment. A kavehane, a coffee house. Intrigued, you navigate the narrow, crowded lanes, dodging donkeys laden with goods and porters straining under impossible loads. You find it not a palace of pleasure, but likely a modest, perhaps even slightly dingy, storefront. No blaring neon signs, just a wisp of unfamiliar, roasted aroma beckoning you in from its shadowy corners. You push aside a heavy curtain or step through a simple doorway, and your senses are met with something entirely new. The air inside is warm, thick with the steam from boiling water and the rich, slightly acrid, but compelling scent of roasting and brewing coffee. It's a far cry from your local artisanal coffee shop with its minimalist decor and lo-fi beats. This is ground zero. The light is dim, filtering in from the street or from a few flickering oil lamps, casting long shadows on the walls. Patrons, mostly men, are seated on low wooden stools or rush mats, clustered in small groups. Some are merchants, their faces etched with the anxieties of trade. Others might be artisans, their hands still bearing the marks of their craft. Perhaps a few turbaned scholars are there too, their expressions thoughtful. The coffee itself. Forget your lattes and flat whites. This is the real deal. 16th century style. The beans are likely roasted dark, very dark, possibly even a bit burnt by today's standards, then ground into a fine powder, so fine it's like dust. It's brewed in small, long-handled copper pots called sesvis, right over hot coals. The result is a thick, potent, unfiltered brew, served in small, handleless cups. You take a sip. It's strong, bitter, and the fine grounds settle at the bottom, a bit like a muddy surprise if you're not careful. Some might say it's an acquired taste, others might say it tastes like regret mixed with ambition. You'd probably ask for sugar, and they'd look at you like you'd asked for a side of unicorn tears. Sugar was a luxury, and this early coffee was often enjoyed for its bracing bitterness. Yet, despite the rustic nature of the drink, or perhaps because of it, people are drawn to these places. The conversations are initially hushed, tentative. What do you talk about in this new, neutral territory? You talk about the coffee itself, naturally. Remarkable, isn't it? Keeps you awake, they say. And indeed, that was one of its early selling points. A fascinating, quirky tidbit is that certain Sufi mystics had already been using coffee for centuries in Yemen and Mecca to stay alert during their long nocturnal prayer rituals and chanting sessions, known as dhikr. So this stimulating effect wasn't entirely unknown, but bringing it into a public, secular space was revolutionary. Suddenly, you have a place where men can gather, sharpen their wits, and talk for hours without the intoxicating effects of alcohol or the formal constraints of other meeting places. They discuss news from distant provinces brought by traveling merchants, the latest prices in the market, the whispers from the Topkapi Palace, or perhaps just the mundane details of their day. It's the birth of a new social institution, a third place between home and work, all sparked by a humble bean and a few shadowy corners in a bustling city. The seeds of countless ideas, poems, business ventures, and yes, even rebellions, are being sown in these nascent coffee houses, one bitter, invigorating sip at a time. You can almost hear the gentle clinking of cups, the murmur of 100 nascent dialogues, the slow, steady grind of history being made, one tiny coffee ground at a time. It's a bit like the internet, but with more smoke and considerably less cat videos. You're still there? In spirit, in the heart of 16th century Constantinople, nursing that small cup of potent, perhaps slightly gritty, coffee you braved in one of those first shadowy kavahain down in Tatakele. Remember that initial, almost cautious atmosphere, the hushed tones, the novelty of it all. Hold on to your metaphorical fez, because that quiet beginning is about to explode. It turns out that those two enterprising Syrians, Hakim and Shams, weren't just selling a drink, they were selling an experience. And Constantinople, it seems, was absolutely parched for it. The city doesn't just politely accept coffee, it develops a full-blown, passionate craving, and the warm, pervasive allure of this new brew begins to weave itself into the very fabric of urban life with astonishing speed. It's like when that one friend tries a new restaurant and suddenly everyone has to go. Except this trend has more staying power than avocado toast, and a much more interesting aroma. Within just a few short years, certainly by the 1560s and 70s, coffee houses are no longer a rare novelty confined to the bustling commercial heart. They are springing up everywhere, a testament to their rocketing popularity. You start to notice them near the grand mosques, offering a place for contemplation or quiet discussion after prayers. They appear in residential quarters, tucked into neighborhood squares, becoming familiar local haunts. You see them near the barracks of the Janissaries, close to the shipyards along the Golden Horn, and even on the roads leading out of the city gates. This rapid proliferation is a key historical fact. The number of coffee houses in Constantinople quickly grew from those first pioneering two into the dozens, and then into the hundreds. It's a caffeine-fueled urban transformation. And the aroma. That's the intoxicating part promised in the title of our little imaginary chapter here. As you wander through the city's labyrinthine streets, the scent of roasting coffee beans becomes an increasingly common note in the urban olfactory landscape. It's a rich, toasty, sometimes slightly smoky perfume that cuts through the other city smells. The brine from the Bosphorus, the spices from the bazaars, the charcoal from the workshops. Imagine small roasteries, perhaps attached to the larger coffee houses or operating as separate enterprises. Their metal drums turning slowly over glowing embers, releasing clouds of fragrant smoke. This isn't your subtle sealed bag of beans scent. This is an announcement, a declaration that coffee has arrived and is here to stay. Some mornings, it feels like the entire city is waking up to a collective coffee alarm clock. Its aroma a comforting, energizing blanket. Step inside one of these now more numerous establishments. They're still not opulent, not yet the grand, tiled halls some would later become, but they're evolving. The spaces might be a little larger, the seating a bit more organized. You'd still find the low benches or divans, the small tables, the ever-present sesvies bubbling away. The sounds are changing too. The initial hushed reverence has given way to a more confident hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional burst of laughter or an emphatic point being made in a debate. And here's a quirky tidbit for you in many of these places, especially the smaller ones. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of coffee beans being pounded into powder in large stone or wooden mortars by apprentices or dedicated coffee grinders would have been a constant background percussion. It's a strangely soothing sound. The heartbeat of the kavahan. Forget your electric grinders, this was artisanal elbow grease coffee preparation, and that sound became synonymous with these new social hubs. The allure is multifaceted. Of course, there's the coffee itself, that jolt of energy, the sharpened focus it seemed to provide. For a society that valued wit and lively conversation, a non-alcoholic stimulant was a game changer. No more afternoon slumps during long business discussions or scholarly debates. Suddenly, you could talk for hours and still remember what you said the next day, mostly. But historians still argue whether the initial explosive appeal of coffee houses was primarily due to the psychoactive properties of the coffee itself, or the unique social environment they fostered. Was it the bean or the scene? It was likely an inseparable combination, the coffee fueling the conversation and the conversation making the coffee taste even better. These places are becoming the city's living rooms, its open forums. Unlike the Mayhanes, there's no pressure to get rowdy. No religious prohibition hanging over your head, at least. Not officially. Not yet. Unlike the mosque, the conversation isn't confined to theology. Unlike the marketplace, you're not there solely to transact. Here, you can simply be. You can listen. You can talk. You can think. You can nurse that single-leg strong cup. That same one you might have found a muddy surprise at the bottom of earlier, for an hour or more, soaking in the atmosphere. It's the original co-working space, minus the laptops and the passive-aggressive notes about cleaning the microwave. For a few small coins, you get warmth in winter, a place to rest your weary legs, and a front-row seat to the city's unfolding drama. The cost of a coffee was low enough for many to afford, making it a relatively democratic space, though we'll delve more into who exactly frequented these places later. For now, just breathe in that complex aroma, feel the warmth, and listen to the rising tide of chatter. The city is falling head over heels for coffee, and its warm embrace is changing the way people connect, one shared brew at a time. So, you're now comfortably settled into the 16th century Constantinople coffee craze. The rich aroma a familiar friend, the rhythmic thump-thump of beans being ground into that fine powder, destined to become that muddy surprise if you're not careful. A common city sound? These kava honeys have blossomed from a couple of curious experiments in Tattakale into a city-wide phenomenon. But who exactly is filling these bustling, smoke-hazed rooms from dawn till well into the night? Who are these individuals leaning in, gesturing emphatically? Their voices a low hum against the clatter of cups and the bubbling of sesvies on the brazier, prepare to meet the motley gathering, a truly fascinating cross-section of Ottoman society, all drawn together by the allure of the dark brew and the promise of unfiltered discourse. Well, mostly unfiltered. We'll get to the asterisks later. Step into almost any coffee house, and your eyes will immediately pick out the merchants, their faces often etched with the calculations of commerce. They're discussing shipping routes, the price of pepper from the east, or perhaps the reliability of a certain Venetian trader. Deals are struck, partnerships forged, and fortunes subtly shifted over tiny cups of black coffee. Then you have the artisans and craftsmen, their hands perhaps still dusted with flour, or smelling faintly of leather or wood. They're here to take a well-earned break, to catch up on guild news, or maybe just to escape the workshop for an hour. You might see a master goldsmith chatting with a humble cobbler, something less likely in more formal settings. It's networking, 16th century style. No awkward LinkedIn requests involved. Just a shared appreciation for a good brew and a bit of banter. And then there are the men of the pen and the book. You'll spot them easily: scholars, teachers, students, perhaps even a few poets with ink stains on their fingers and a faraway look in their eyes. They gather to debate points of philosophy, to discuss recent astronomical observations, or to dissect the nuances of classical Arabic poetry. It's in these lively intellectual exchanges that coffee houses earned one of their most enduring monikers, Mekteba Irfan, which translates beautifully to schools of knowledge or schools of the wise. This isn't a formal school with a curriculum out, of course, but an organic, ever-evolving academy of the street, where learning is a communal activity, fueled by caffeine and curiosity. Imagine trying to get a word in edgewise. It was probably like a live-action Twitter feed, but with more elaborate sentence structures. Don't be surprised to see off-duty janissaries, the elite troops of the Sultan, their imposing figures lounging on the divans, their distinctive white felt caps perhaps set aside. They might be grumbling about their pay, sharing stories from the frontiers of the empire, or simply enjoying a moment of camaraderie away from the strict discipline of their barracks. Their presence could lend a certain frisson to the atmosphere, a reminder of the empire's military might, even in a place of leisure. You'd also find government clerks and lower-level bureaucrats, the cogs in the vast Ottoman administrative machine, escaping the dust of the archives to exchange office gossip or debate the merits of a new decree. Even members of the ulema, the religious scholars and judiciary, would frequent these establishments, though their conversations might lean more towards theological interpretations or legal matters. Dervishes, too. Those wandering mystics might drift in, adding their own unique spiritual flavor to the mix. And Jaibat, of course, there are those with more time on their hands. The idlers, the unemployed, the simply curious, all drawn by the warmth, the company, and the constant flow of information. For them, the coffee house is a cheap form of entertainment, a place to see and be seen, a window onto the bustling life of the city. This brings us to a rather delightful, quirky tidbit. Many coffee houses began to host professional storytellers, known as meta. These were charismatic performers who could hold an audience captive for hours with epic tales of heroism, romance, and adventure, often drawn from history, folklore, or religious texts. They would use a simple staff or handkerchief as their only props, their voices rising and falling, their gestures animated, painting vivid pictures in the minds of their listeners. Sometimes, newsreaders would also frequent coffee houses, declaiming the latest events or official pronouncements for those who couldn't read or didn't have access to written information. Imagine getting your breaking news not from a push notification, but from a dude with a really good voice and a flair for the dramatic. But how motley was this gathering? Really? And how unfiltered was the discourse? This is where historians still argue whether these coffee houses truly leveled social hierarchies, with paishas rubbing shoulders with porters, or if they merely provided a new, more informal stage for the existing social order to play out. While it's true that a wider range of people could be found in a coffee house than in many other social institutions, and there was a certain democratic air. Social distinctions didn't just evaporate at the door. A high-ranking official would still command a degree of deference, and while a commoner might listen to his conversation, interrupting him directly would be a bold move. Furthermore, while conversations could be remarkably frank, especially compared to the carefully constructed pronouncements of the court, patrons knew to be discreet when it came to criticizing the sultan or high state officials too openly. The walls, as they say, might have ears, and we'll explore those ears in more detail later. For now, just picture yourself in the midst of this lively, diverse crowd. The air is thick with opinions, stories, and the ever-present aroma of coffee. It's a place of connection, of information exchange, of intellectual stimulation, and simple human fellowship. The Kavahan is fast becoming the pulse of the city, a place where you can truly feel the heartbeat of the Ottoman world. You're becoming quite the Kavihani connoisseur now, aren't you? You've navigated the initial smoky haze of those early establishments, mingled with the motley gathering of scholars, merchants, and janissaries, and perhaps even caught a performance by a captivating meta. Those storytellers we talked about. You've seen how these places became informal, schools of the wise. Oh, but beyond the intellectual debates and the epic tales, these coffee houses are buzzing with something even more immediate. Something that makes them utterly indispensable to the everyday life of Constantinople news. And not just the officially sanctioned, carefully curated news, but the raw, unfiltered, sometimes wild and woolly stuff. Welcome to the 16th century information superhighway, a veritable news bazaar where whispers travel faster than a sultan's decree on a slow horse. Forget waiting for the town crier to make his rounds, or for a tattered notice to be pinned up in the market square. If you want to know what's really going on in the city, the empire, or even lands beyond the Ottoman domain, you head to your local coffee house. It's here, amidst the clinking of cups and the low murmur of 100 conversations. That information flows like, well, coffee. Why here? Because, as you've seen, everyone comes here. Merchants fresh off the ships docking in the Golden Horn bring tales from Venice, Alexandria, or the Crimean ports. Soldiers returning from campaigns on the Persian or Hungarian frontiers share first-hand accounts of battles and sieges. Bureaucrats let slip intriguing morsels of palace intrigue or discuss the implications of a new tax. It's a living, breathing network, a human internet where the connections are forged over shared warmth and a bitter brew. It's probably faster than your current Wi-Fi on a bad day, and definitely more entertaining. The range of information is staggering. You might hear about a new imperial decree literally hours before it's officially proclaimed, as a clerk who helped draft it discusses its potential impact with his fellows. News of a good harvest in Anatolia, or a locust swarm devastating crops in Egypt, could reach your ears through a merchant calculating its effect on prices. Details of a naval skirmish in the Mediterranean, the latest political maneuvering in the Safavid court of Persia, or even strange omens observed in a distant province. It all finds its way into the coffeehouse chatter. This is a crucial historical fact for many ordinary citizens. The coffeehouse was the primary and most immediate source of news, often outpacing any official channels. Think of it as the city's collective ear to the ground. Of course, with news comes its ever-present, slightly more flamboyant cousin rumor. And the rumors that would fly in a Kavahan, because there's no Snopes or PolitiFact to do a quick check. A whisper could morph into a roar by the time it crossed the room. Did the Grand Vizier really slip on a fig and fall down the palace stairs? Or is that just wishful thinking from a disgruntled petitioner? Is there truly a new wonder drug from India that cures baldness? Or is that just a merchant trying to offload some questionable herbs? The coffee house is where speculation runs wild, where anxieties are amplified, and where public opinion begins to coalesce, often based on the most tantalizing, if not always verifiable tidbits. It was the original echo chamber, capable of making a minor incident sound like the apocalypse or vice versa. You had to develop a pretty good filter, or just enjoy the ride. Now, for a quirky little detail about this news ecosystem, While the meta were known for their elaborate, often fictional or historical storytelling, there was also a niche for individuals who were more like dedicated news rapporteurs, or let's call them information artists. These weren't official journalists in any modern sense, but men who made it their business to collect interesting pieces of news, from dockside gossip to whispers from government offices, and then recount them engagingly to the coffeehouse patrons. They were the human aggregators, the walking, talking news feeds of their day. Some might have even been paid by the kavitsi, the coffeehouse owner, or by appreciative listeners for their services, especially if their information was considered particularly fresh or juicy. They had to be careful, of course, as peddling outright falsehoods could damage their reputation, or worse, attract the wrong kind of attention. The very nature of this information flow, its speed, and its often unverified content, naturally made the authorities a little twitchy. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman authorities viewed this informal news network primarily as a useful, if unofficial, way for information and public sentiment to disseminate and be gauged, or as an uncontrollable hotbed of seditious rumor and potential unrest from its very inception. On one hand, it could be a way for the administration to subtly float ideas or gauge public reaction. On the other, a false rumor about a military defeat or a new unpopular tax could cause serious public disorder before the official version of events could even be formulated. It's a delicate balance, this world of free-flowing information. So you sit there, nursing your coffee, trying to sift the facts from the fiction. The air is thick not just with the aroma of the brew, but with stories, speculations, anxieties, and triumphs. It's a dynamic, ever-changing tapestry of information, woven by countless voices. This isn't just a place to get a caffeine fix. It's where the city tells itself its own story. Every single day. And as you listen, you realize that these conversations, these exchanges of news and rumor, are not just idle chatter. They are shaping perceptions, influencing decisions, and slowly, subtly, contributing to the currents that move an empire. You've successfully navigated the whirlwind of the Kavahan as a news bazaar, sifting through the facts and the fascinating fictions, maybe even catching an update from one of those dedicated news rapporteurs we imagined. You've felt the pulse of the city's information network. But now, let's tune your ears to a different frequency, a sound that rises above the general din of commerce and current events. Beyond the latest headlines and the hushed gossip, if you listen closely, you'll discern the more measured cadences of debate, the flourish of a well-turned phrase, the passionate recitation of verse. This is where the coffeehouse truly earns its title as a Mektabai Irfan, a school of the wise, transforming from a mere gossip hub into a vibrant arena for intellectual ferment, eloquent reason, and the intoxicating dance of ink and rhyme. Imagine the scene in one corner. A group of turbaned men are engrossed in a theological discussion, perhaps debating a fine point of Islamic jurisprudence or interpreting a complex passage from the Quran. Their voices are earnest, their gestures precise, the steam from their coffee cups mingling with the intensity of their arguments. Nearby, a different circle might be engaged in a philosophical discourse, perhaps pondering the nature of existence or the ethics of governance, drawing upon the wisdom of ancient Greek philosophers as readily as contemporary Ottoman scholars. Remember, this is an empire at a cultural crossroads, and its thinkers are grappling with a world of ideas. You'd need a pretty strong cup of that dark, potent coffee, maybe two, to keep up with some of these mental gymnastics. Trying to argue metaphysics after 3 rounds of that stuff would be an Olympic sport in itself. But it's poetry that truly electrifies the atmosphere. In Ottoman society, poetry isn't just a niche hobby for a sensitive few. It's a deeply respected art form, a vital means of expression, and a popular entertainment. And the coffee houses. They become the premier stage for poets of all stripes. This is a key historical fact. These establishments were crucial venues for poets to share their work, receive instant feedback, and even engage in thrilling poetic duels or contests known as mushara. Picture an aspiring poet, voice perhaps trembling slightly, reciting his latest ghazal, a lyrical ode of love and longing, his eyes scanning the faces of the seasoned listeners for approval. Or imagine two established masters of verse challenging each other line by line, improvising couplets on a given theme or rhyme, their wit flashing like scimitars in a duel of words. The audience would be rapt, snapping their fingers or murmuring, ah, in appreciation of a particularly beautiful image or clever turn of phrase. It's like a rap battle phone, but with more complex rhyme schemes and significantly more references to nightingales and roses. And here's a wonderfully quirky tidbit for you: the practice of talik, or hanging poems. Sometimes witty verse, a satirical observation, a poignant couplet, or even a complaint about the quality of the coffee heaven. Forbid would be written down and literally pinned or pasted to the walls of the coffee house. It was an open mic night for the literate, a kind of anonymous public forum or a 16th century comment section. Patrons would gather around these hanging poems, reading them, discussing them, sometimes adding their own written responses or counterpoems. It created a dynamic, evolving literary tapestry right there on the walls, a testament to the vibrant, participatory nature of coffeehouse culture. You can just imagine the arguments, the laughter, the knowing winks sparked by these publicly displayed verses. These coffeehouses, or at least some of them, effectively become informal literary salons. Aspiring writers could meet established authors, students could learn from seasoned scholars, and new ideas could be tested and refined in an atmosphere that was generally more relaxed and less hierarchical than the formal madrasas or court circles. Handwritten manuscripts of poetry, history, or philosophy might be passed around, read aloud, and discussed. Friendships and intellectual rivalries would blossom in these smoky, caffeinated spaces. Certain coffeehouses might even develop reputations for attracting particular intellectual or artistic crowds, one known for its fiery theological debates, another for its more bohemian poets, a third for its historians and calligraphers. Of course, these debates and discussions weren't always calm and contemplative. Passions could flare, voices could be raised, and intellectual disagreements could sometimes get quite heated. After all, these are men deeply invested in their ideas, their beliefs, and their art. Yet, there was generally an understanding, an unwritten code of conduct that allowed for a remarkable degree of intellectual sparring. But this leads to an ongoing discussion among modern scholars. Historians still argue whether the intellectual discourse in coffeehouses primarily reflected existing scholarly trends perpetuated by the madrasa system and the established literary canons, or if it actively forged new, perhaps more populist or even subversive directions in Ottoman thought and literary expression. Were they merely echoing the ideas of the elite in a more accessible venue, or was genuine innovation brewing alongside the coffee? So, as you sit there, the aroma of cardamom perhaps lightly scenting your coffee, you're not just a passive observer. You're in the crucible of Ottoman intellectual life. You witness the cut and thrust of debate, the soulful expression of poetry, the quiet intensity of scholars lost in thought. The Kavahan is more than just a place to drink coffee. It's a place where minds meet, where ideas clash and coalesce, where the ink flows freely, and the rhymes resonate with the joys and sorrows of an empire. It's a testament to the power of a shared space to foster creativity and critical thought. And just imagine the poetry slams. They must have been epic. You've been soaking in the intellectual vibrancy of the Kavahan, haven't you? Listening to the poets duel with verses sharp as daggers, nodding along as scholars unravel the mysteries of the universe. Perhaps even deciphering a witty couplet or two from those talik, the hanging poems that we talked about. It's a heady atmosphere, this school of the wise. But the same freedom that allows beautiful poetry and profound philosophy to flourish in these smoky rooms also allows other, more dangerous seeds to sprout. Lean in a little closer, past the discussions of metaphysics and metaphors, and you'll start to hear at the hushed, sometimes risky tones of political critique. The murmurs against the divan, the powerful imperial council that governs the vast Ottoman Empire in the Sultan's name. It's an almost inevitable progression. You've got a diverse group of people, fueled by caffeine and the latest news and rumors, some of which, as you recall, could be quite wild. They've debated everything under the sun, from the price of grain to the meaning of life. It's only natural that their conversations would eventually drift towards those who wield power, especially when that power directly impacts their daily lives. A new tax is levied, a popular official is dismissed, a military campaign goes awry. These aren't just abstract events, they're topics that ignite passions and opinions. And the coffee house, with its relatively open and egalitarian atmosphere, becomes the natural forum for these opinions to be aired, often with a frankness that would be unthinkable in more formal settings. It's like your office water cooler. If the water was strong coffee and your boss was a guy with an army and a penchant for beheading. So, what do these murmurs against the divan actually sound like? You're unlikely to hear outright calls for rebellion, at least not in the early days, and not from anyone with a strong sense of self-preservation. That would be suicidally foolish. Instead, it's more subtle, more nuanced. You might hear merchants grumbling about a new customs duty they deem unfair, comparing it unfavorably to the good old days. Perhaps a group of artisans is quietly complaining about a corrupt local kada or judge whose rulings seem to favor the wealthy. You could overhear scholars discussing historical instances of tyranny, drawing parallels that are perhaps a little too close for comfort. Sometimes the critique is veiled in satire. A story about a foolish donkey who mismanages a farm might sound suspiciously like a commentary on a particularly inept governor. Those Talik poems on the wall, some of them might carry a sharp political barb, cleverly disguised in ornate language, a sort of 16th century subtweet aimed at a powerful vizier. These conversations are often conducted in lowered voices, with sidelong glances to see who might be listening. There's an undercurrent of risk, a frisson of daring that makes the shared complaints almost more satisfying. This is where you begin to sense the unspoken rules of the Kavahan. While it's a place of relative freedom, that freedom has invisible boundaries. Criticizing a long-dead sultan from a rival dynasty? Probably fine. Mocking the current Grand Vizier's new turban risky, but perhaps survivable if done wittily enough and among trusted company. Openly questioning the sultan's authority. You might as well start picking out your own eulogy. It's a delicate dance, and everyone instinctively knows the steps. This brings us to a crucial historical fact. These coffee houses, precisely because they facilitated such a free exchange of information and opinion, inevitably became focal points for political dissatisfaction and criticism. Government policies were dissected, officials were lampooned, and a nascent public opinion, distinct from the official pronouncements of the palace monumentis, began to take shape within their walls. And the authorities, quite naturally, started to view these establishments with a growing sense of suspicion. They weren't just harmless dens of caffeinated chatter anymore, they were potential breeding grounds for dissent. Now, for a quirky little detail about navigating these treacherous conversational waters, the art of coded language and allegory. When you wanted to complain about something truly sensitive, you didn't always say it directly. Instead, you might use euphemisms, metaphors, or allusions that only those in the know would understand. A seemingly innocent discussion about the bitterness of the coffee lately might be a veiled reference to hard economic times under the current administration. A poem lamenting a cruel and distant beloved could, to the discerning ear, be a critique of an aloof or oppressive ruler. It's a sophisticated game of subtext, where meaning is layered and plausible deniability is key. You had to be a bit of a literary critic just to understand the political gossip. Of course, the actual impact of these clandestine critiques is a matter of ongoing scholarly discussion. Historians still argue whether these political murmurs in coffee houses constituted a genuine counter-public sphere capable of influencing policy decisions, or if they were largely a tolerated safety valve for discontent, a way for people to blow off steam as long as they didn't cross those invisible, dangerous lines. Were these conversations truly shaping the political landscape, or were they just the background noise of a sprawling empire, mostly ignored by those in power until they became too loud? Regardless of their ultimate political impact, these hushed conversations, these shared grievances, create a sense of solidarity among the patrons. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing you're not the only one who feels a certain way, a subtle bond formed in the shared risk of speaking, even softly and against power. The coffee house becomes more than just a place for news or poetry. It becomes a space for communal sighing, for the collective rolling of eyes at the absurdities of officialdom. It's a subtle, almost invisible form of resistance, brewing alongside the dark. Strong coffee. And as these murmurs grow, so too does the attention they attract from those who would prefer silence. All right, so you've been right there in the thick of it, eavesdropping on those hushed, critical conversations about the divan, maybe even sharing a knowing glance with a fellow patron as a particularly pointed, yet cleverly veiled comment about the Grand Vizier's latest policy hangs in the smoky air. You've felt that thrill of shared, mild defiance. But remember how we said the walls might have ears? Well, those hushed tones and those not-so-subtle murmurs against authority didn't exactly go unnoticed by the folks in the big palace across town. The Sultan and his advisors, while perhaps enjoying their own private coffee ceremonies, weren't entirely thrilled about what was brewing in the public kavahans. Their gaze upon these bubbling dens of discourse was, shall we say, decidedly wary, and their tolerance levels fluctuated like the price of saffron in a bad harvest year. You can almost imagine the reports landing on the Grand Vizier's ornate desk. Your Excellency, the coffee houses are abuzz with talk of the new grain tax. Or, my spies indicate that a satirical poem about a certain high official, no names mentioned, of course, is making the rounds in the Fateh district Kavehanes. Hasti, it's one thing for people to gather and discuss poetry or the news from distant lands. It's quite another when they start dissecting state affairs, criticizing officials, and forming opinions outside the carefully controlled channels of official information. These coffee houses, remember, are unique. They're not the mosque, not the guild hall, not the marketplace. They are relatively autonomous spaces where a diverse crowd, those motley gatherings we've met, can mingle and talk with a degree of freedom rarely found elsewhere. And for any centralized authority, uncontrolled public assembly and unbridled chatter are often viewed with suspicion. It's like finding out your cat has learned to use the internet. Initially amusing, potentially terrifying. The official concerns weren't just about political grumbling, though that was a big one. Some religious conservatives began to view coffee houses as dens of iniquity. They argued that men were wasting their time there, neglecting their work, their families, and their religious duties. Instead of being at the mosque for prayers, they were lounging on divans, sipping this newfangled brew, and engaging in idle talk. Or Malayani. There were even attempts by some stern religious scholars to declare coffee an intoxicant, like alcohol, and therefore haram, or forbidden by Islamic law. This is a fascinating, quirky tidbit. Imagine a fierce debate, not about a point of theology, but about whether that morning cup of joe is technically sending you to the bad place. Luckily for coffee lovers, that particular argument never gained universal traction, but it added to the cloud of suspicion. This wary gaze led to a fluctuating official response. There were periods of relative tolerance, where the coffee houses were allowed to flourish, perhaps seen as a harmless diversion or even a useful way to gauge public mood. But then, often triggered by a period of political instability, a moral panic, or a particularly paranoid sultan, the hammer would come down. This is a crucial historical fact. Several Ottoman sultans, most famously the formidable Murad IV in the early 17th century, issued strict prohibitions against coffee consumption and ordered the wholesale closure of coffee houses. The justifications were usually a cocktail of reasons. They were hotbeds of sedition. They encouraged idleness and vice. They were contrary to religious law. They disturbed public order. Suddenly, your cozy neighborhood kavahane could be boarded up, its owner fined or worse. Enforcement during these bans could be quite dramatic. The authorities would employ spies known as mukhbirin, who might disguise themselves as ordinary citizens, dervishes, or even street vendors to patrol the city. Their job was to sniff out any illicit coffee drinking, locate clandestine coffee houses operating in defiance of the ban, and report the culprits. It's like a game of cat and mouse, and with the scent of roasting beans being a dead giveaway. Imagine the fear. Is that quiet man in the corner genuinely enjoying his now illegal cup? Or is he taking notes on everyone present? It certainly would have put a damper on the free-flowing political commentary, or at least driven it much further underground. People probably got very good at that coded language we talked about, or just stuck to talking about the weather, which, in Constantinople, it can also be quite dramatic. Naturally, these bans were often deeply unpopular and difficult to enforce effectively. Coffee, by this point, had become a beloved habit for many. Closing the coffee houses didn't just deprive people of their daily caffeine fix, it disrupted social lives and even had economic consequences, putting coffee merchants, roasters, and kavachi out of business. As a result, coffee consumption often just went underground, with people brewing it secretly in their homes or in hidden back rooms, much like a Prohibition-era speakeasy. But for coffee, one can only imagine the elaborate schemes to smuggle beans and keep the braziers burning low. Password: black, no sugar. The core of this official ambivalence is something historians still argue whether the official condemnations and periodic bans on coffee houses stemmed more from genuine moral panic and religious conservatism, a desire to uphold public piety and order, or from a pragmatic fear of uncontrolled public assembly and its inherent political threat. Was it truly about saving souls from the evils of idleness and a potentially intoxicating bean? Or was it about silencing dissent and keeping the population from gathering in ways the state couldn't easily monitor or control? Perhaps it was a bit of both, the moral arguments providing a convenient public justification for politically motivated suppression. So, as you sit in your mental kavajon, you notice the atmosphere can shift. One day it's lively and open. The next, after a new edict or a fresh wave of arrests, it's subdued, patrons eyeing each other with a little more caution. The Sultan's wary gaze casts a long shadow, and the future of these schools of the wise often hangs precariously in the balance, dependent on the whims of imperial power and the ever-present tension between the desire for social connection and the state's demand for order and obedience. After all that talk of the Sultan's wary gaze, lurking spies, and the looming threat of sudden shutdowns we navigated in the last section, you might be forgiven for thinking that Ottoman coffee houses were perpetually grim. Tense affairs where everyone just whispered about politics and nervously eyed the exits. And while that undercurrent of caution was certainly real, especially in turbulent times, it's far from the whole picture. You see, these kavahans were also vibrant centers of joy, laughter, and pure, unadulterated entertainment. When openly discussing the Grand Vizier's shortcomings became a bit too dicey, you could always find relief and delight on the small, makeshift stages that often materialized in the smoky haze. So, let's push aside the political intrigue for a moment and immerse ourselves in the sights and sounds of coffeehouse entertainment. Remember the Meddah, those captivating storytellers we touched upon earlier? They were the superstars of the Kavahani entertainment scene. Picture this: the usual hum of conversation dies down as the Meddah takes his place, often on a slightly raised platform or simply a cleared space in the center of the room. He might have a simple staff in one hand and a handkerchief in the other. These are his only props. With these, and the incredible power of his voice and gestures, he will conjure entire worlds. One moment he's a valiant warrior charging into battle, his voice a booming war cry. The next, he's a coy maiden whispering sweet nothings, his handkerchief fluttering delicately. He'll weave epic tales of legendary heroes like Antar or Battle Ghazi, recount humorous anecdotes of Nasruddin Hoja's follies and wisdom, or bring tears to your eyes with a tragic romance. These performers were masters of mimicry, shifting characters and moods with breathtaking skill, holding audiences spellbound for hours. Forget binge watching your favorite series. This was live, episodic storytelling at its finest, with the next installment eagerly awaited each evening. Then, as the oil lamps cast flickering shadows on a stretched linen screen, another kind of magic would begin: the Karagoz and Hasivat shadow puppet plays. This is a truly iconic form of Ottoman entertainment, and the coffee houses were its principal theaters. This is a mainstream historical fact. These shadow puppet shows were immensely popular, offering a unique blend of comedy, social satire, and sheer visual delight. Imagine a puppeteer, the hyly or imaginationist, hidden behind the screen, skillfully manipulating intricately crafted figures. And here's a wonderfully quirky tidbit for you. These puppets were traditionally made from dried, treated, and thinly scraped camel or water buffalo hide, which was then oiled to make it translucent and painted with vibrant, jewel-like colors. When backlit, they would glow with an almost ethereal light. The stars of the show were, of course, Karagoz, the everyman, uneducated, impulsive, and prone to slapstick and misunderstandings, and Hatzivat, his more learned, somewhat pretentious, and often exasperated companion. Their dialogues, full of puns, wordplay, and earthy humor, would lampoon various social types: the boastful soldier, the quack doctor, the foppish dandy, the shrewd merchant from a particular ethnic group, often playing on stereotypes. It must be said, the plots were usually simple, revolving around Karagoz's attempts to find work, get rich quick, or simply navigate the absurdities of daily life, inevitably leading to comical disasters. It was often bawdy, sometimes irreverent, and could subtly poke fun at bureaucracy or social injustices in a way that direct speech never could. The audience would roar with laughter at Karagoz's antics, his every pratfall and witty retort. It's like watching your favorite animated sitcom, but with more leather and a distinct possibility the puppets are making fun of your uncle. But the entertainment wasn't just about words and puppets. Music, too, filled the air of many a kavahena. You might find a solitary musician softly playing an oud, its melancholic notes weaving through the conversations, or a small ensemble with a saz, a long-necked lute, a commence, a small bowed fiddle, or a ney and end-blown flute creating a more lively atmosphere. They would play popular folk songs, classical Ottoman compositions, or perhaps even take requests if you tipped well enough. That is, this music could set the mood, providing a soothing backdrop for contemplation, a lively rhythm for more animated discussions, or a poignant soundtrack to a storyteller's tale. Sometimes patrons themselves might bring an instrument, and an impromptu jam session would ensue. It's pure analog entertainment, no auto-tune in sight. The nature and prevalence of this entertainment, especially the satirical elements like those in Karagoz plays, naturally leads to some scholarly discussion. Historians still argue whether the often biting social satire embedded within Karagoz plays, for example, served as a genuine form of popular critique and a subtle channel for dissent, or if it was more of a carefully managed bread and circuses style diversion, allowing people to laugh off frustrations without posing any real threat to the established order. Was Karagoz truly speaking truth to power through his comical blunders, or was he just a jester distracting the masses? The answer, like the coffee, is probably complex and a little murky. So you lean back on your divan, the taste of coffee still on your tongue, the smoke from the pipes and braziers swirling around you like a mystical fog. You're surrounded by the sounds of laughter, applause, the twang of a saz, the dramatic pronouncements of a storyteller. The kafehane, in these moments, is a sanctuary, a place of shared delight and communal experience. It's a stage where the city's imagination comes to life, offering a much-needed escape from the everyday, and a reminder that even under a wary sultan's gaze, joy and artistry will always find a way to flourish. You've been serenaded by musicians, captivated by the meta's epic tales, and had your ribs tickled by the antics of Karagöz and Hasivat on the shadow puppet screen. You've truly experienced the vibrant soul of coffeehouse entertainment. But now, let's take a step back from the performers and turn our attention to the stage itself. The physical space of the Kavahan. What did it actually look like? Feel like? Smell like inside this bustling cauldron of Ottoman social life? Let's push aside the imaginary curtain and try to visualize the typical layout, decor, and the everyday hum of activity within. As you approach, remember there's no grand, imposing facade, usually just a simple doorway, perhaps covered with a heavy curtain or a rustic wooden door, nestled into a row of other shops and buildings. You nudge it open, and the first thing that hits you is a wave of warmth, a complex, inviting aroma, that signature blend of roasting coffee, sweet tobacco smoke as its popularity grew, a hint of wood smoke from the brazier, and the general scent of humanity all mingling together. It's the unique Eau de Cavahan, a perfume you wouldn't find bottled anywhere. Thankfully. The second thing is the sound of pervasive, energetic hum of conversations, punctuated by the clinking of cups, perhaps the rhythmic thump of a pestle if coffee's being ground, or the strains of music we've already enjoyed. Stepping further inside, your eyes adjust to the often dim lighting. Light filters in from the doorway, maybe from a few latticed windows that look out onto the busy street. But much of the illumination comes from flickering oil lamps or candles strategically placed around the room, casting long, dancing shadows and contributing to that characteristic smoky haze we've mentioned. It's not exactly ideal for reading fine print, but perfect for creating an intimate, conspiratorial atmosphere, or hiding the fact you spilled coffee down your caftan. The layout itself is generally quite simple and functional, designed for communal gathering. This is a key historical fact. Coffeehouses were typically furnished with low wooden benches or built-in divans, called sedir, that lined the perimeter of the main room, or sometimes arranged in alcoves. These sedirs would be covered with woven kilims, rush mats, or perhaps plush cushions in the more upscale establishments, inviting you to recline, get comfortable, and stay a while. Scattered throughout the space are small, low tables, often hexagonal or octagonal in shape, just big enough for a few cups and perhaps a shared plate of something sweet. If on offer, the floors would be covered with more mats or carpets, adding to the warmth and absorbing some of the sound. The undisputed heart of the Kavahan, its literal and metaphorical engine room, is the okak. This is the coffee-making station, often a slightly raised platform or a dedicated hearth area, where the kavesi, the coffeehouse owner or master coffee maker, and his apprentices perform their daily ritual. Here, you'd see the glowing braziers, the array of copper sesvies of various sizes, the bags of green coffee beans waiting to be roasted if done on site, the mortars and pestles or grinding mills, and the precious supply of fresh water. It's a hive of activity, a source of constant warmth and that ever-present, invigorating aroma. As for decor, the earliest coffee houses were likely quite plain, perhaps just whitewashed walls. But as they became more established, decorative elements would appear. And here's a lovely quirky tidbit. A common feature in many coffee houses was the display of calligraphy panels. These might feature elegant verses from famous Persian or Ottoman poets, inspiring moral aphorisms or beautifully rendered Quranic passages, reminding patrons of the Mekteb-i-Irfan, the School of the Wise, aspect of these establishments. In some of the grander, more prosperous coffee houses, particularly in later periods, you might even find a small ornate fountain or a marble water basin, a fuskia or shuttervan, its gentle splashing providing a soothing background sound and a cooling effect during the hot summer months. That was your 16th century white noise machine. Now, picture this space filled with bustling daily activity, the cauldron in full bubble. Patrons are constantly coming and going, though many will settle in for hours. The Kvechi is a figure of some importance, orchestrating the coffee production, greeting regulars, perhaps keeping a subtle eye on the conversations. Young apprentices scurry back and forth, tending the fires, grinding beans, washing cups. If there are waiters, they skillfully navigate the crowded floor, balancing trays of tiny, steaming cups. People are engaged in all sorts of activities, animated discussions in small groups, quiet contemplation by solitary figures, intense games of chess or backgammon. Though gambling associated with these games was often frowned upon by the more pious, you'd see individuals poring over handwritten books or documents, while others simply sit and watch the world go by, soaking in the atmosphere. It's a dynamic, ever-shifting human landscape. The level of comfort and cleanliness would, of course, vary greatly. Some coffee houses were renowned for their pleasant ambiance and meticulous upkeep, while others were undoubtedly more rough and ready. But generally, they aimed for a welcoming, unpretentious environment. This leads to a point where historians still argue whether the increasing elaboration of the decor and amenities in some urban coffeehouses over time was primarily a result of competitive pressures among cavichis to attract clientele, or if it reflected the coffeehouse's growing status as a sophisticated and indispensable urban institution. Was it just business, or was it a sign of cultural ascent? So, you find a spot on a crowded sedir, the cushions perhaps a little worn but still comfortable. The air is thick but alive. You're surrounded by the murmur of 100 stories, the scent of 1,000 beans, and the shared warmth of a community finding connection in this unique, smoky, caffeinated haven. You've settled into your spot on the sadir, surrounded by the comforting chaos of the coffee house. The scent of wood smoke and fragrant tobacco mingling with that ever-present, rich coffee aroma. Your eyes, and indeed your nose, are inevitably drawn towards the okak, the glowing heart of this establishment, where the kvechi presides over the creation of the sacred dark brew. This isn't just about quenching thirst or getting a quick caffeine hit. This is about a ritual, an art form, a tradition that's as much a part of the Kavahane experience as the conversations themselves. So let's lean in and watch how this potent elixir is meticulously prepared and reverently served. It all begins, naturally, with the beans. In these early days, the most prized coffee likely comes from Mocha in Yemen, the legendary port that for so long held a near monopoly on the coffee trade. If the Kavahani is a particularly dedicated establishment, you might even witness the roasting process. Imagine the kvechi or his apprentice carefully turning green coffee beans in a wide, shallow pan over a charcoal brazier, or perhaps in a small, hand-cranked cylindrical roaster. The air fills with a sharp, then increasingly sweet and toasty scent as the beans transform from pale green to a deep, rich brown. The cracking sound of the beans expanding is a subtle percussion against the murmur of the room. Once roasted to perfection, often quite dark by today's standards, they are left to cool before the next crucial step, grinding. Forget your electric burr grinders. Here, the roasted beans are pounded in large mortars with heavy pestles, or ground in sturdy hand-cranked mills, until they are reduced to an impalpable powder, finer than flour, almost like dust. This incredibly fine grind is essential for the traditional brewing method. You can hear the rhythmic thump-thump or the steady creak grind as a backdrop to the day's activities. Now, for the brewing itself. This is where the true artistry of the kvechi shines. He takes a kezve, also known as an ibrick, a small, graceful pot traditionally made of copper or brass, with a wide base, a narrower neck, and a long handle. This is the primary tool for Ottoman coffee making, a mainstream historical fact. Into the sezve, he'll measure the cool, fresh water, then add the powdered coffee. If you like your coffee sweetened, and many did, this is when the sugar is added directly to the pot. You'd specify your preference sade unsweetened. For the purists or the perpetually grumpy, az shekerli lightly sweetened, orta shekerli medium sweet, or çok shekerli very sweet, for those with a serious sweet tooth, or perhaps just trying to mask the coffee's impressive bitterness. There's no adding sugar afterwards. It's all part of the alchemical process. The kesve is then placed directly onto the hot embers of the brazier, or sometimes nestled into a shallow pan filled with heated sand, which allows for a more gentle and even heat distribution. The kvetsi watches it intently. The goal is not a rolling boil, which would ruin the flavor and destroy the precious foam. Instead, he coaxes it slowly, allowing the coffee to heat gently until a dark, rich foam, the kapuk, begins to rise to the surface. Just before it threatens to boil over, he deftly removes it from the heat, perhaps spoons a little of the foam into each waiting cup, then returns the sezve to the heat to rise again. Sometimes repeating this process 2 or 3 times to build up a luxurious layer of crema. It's a patient, practiced dance, requiring skill and timing. You definitely wouldn't want to rush your barista here. This is slow coffee, artisan style. And that foam, the kapuk or kamak as it's sometimes called, is absolutely crucial. Here's a delightful, quirky tidbit for you. A thick, velvety, unbroken layer of foam was considered the hallmark of a perfectly brewed cup of Ottoman coffee. It was a matter of pride for the kvetsi, indeed. His reputation could rise or fall on the quality of his foam. A cup served with little or no foam might be seen as a sign of incompetence, or even an insult to the patron. Some old coffee aficionados would say that a good coffee must have a face yuzu olmala, referring to this beautiful, persistent crema. So, no pressure on the coffee guy, right? Once brewed to perfection, the coffee is poured directly from the sezve into small, delicate, handleless cups called finken. It's served piping hot, the rich aroma now intensely concentrated. Often, a cup of coffee will be accompanied by a glass of cold water, which you're meant to sip first to cleanse your palate, allowing you to fully appreciate the complex flavors of the brew. You take the small cup, perhaps cradling its warmth in your hands, and take a slow, careful sip. It's strong, intense, perhaps a little gritty towards the end as the fine grounds, the telv, settle at the bottom. You're not meant to drink these dregs. By the way, trying to get that last drop is a rookie mistake, unless you're planning on having your fortune told from the patterns in the sludge, a practice known as telve falai or tasseography, which, while perhaps not a daily coffeehouse event, was certainly a folk tradition associated with these coffee grounds. Though, historians still argue whether these specific, intricate techniques for achieving the perfect kupuk, or foam, on coffee, considered the hallmark of a superior brew, were meticulously developed in Yemen, refined in Egypt, or truly perfected within Constantinople's own burgeoning and competitive coffee scene. Regardless of its exact origin, the technique was king. You watch as patrons receive their cups, some engaging in animated conversation, others falling into a quiet, contemplative mood as they savor their drink. This isn't a grab-and-go affair. The coffee commands respect, encourages a slower pace. It's a ritual that punctuates the day, fuels the mind, and warms the soul. Each cup is a small, dark miracle, a testament to a tradition being brewed and perfected, one sezve at a time. And believe me, after one sip of this authentic brew, you'd realize your usual morning cup is basically coffee-flavored water. You've savored that perfectly brewed cup of Ottoman coffee, the one with the rich kapuk that the kvetsi crafted with such care. Right there at the bustling okak, you've appreciated the ritual, the tradition, the sheer sensory delight of it all. But as you place your empty finken down, you begin to realize that this sacred dark brew is so much more than just a personal pleasure. It's the final or fragrant product of a vast and surprisingly complex economic chain. A journey that stretches from distant Yemeni highlands all the way to your little table in Constantinople, creating ripples of commerce and employment that touch countless lives across the vast Ottoman Empire. It's time to follow the money, or in this case, the bean, and see how it turns into lira. Our journey starts far to the south, in the fertile, mountainous regions of Yemen. For a long time, This was the exclusive global source of coffee beans, giving the port of Mocha, yes, that Mocha, legendary status. Imagine the Yemeni farmers carefully cultivating the coffee plants, harvesting the ripe red cherries, then processing them to extract the precious green beans within. This was skilled, labor-intensive work, the very foundation of a burgeoning global industry. These beans, once dried and sorted, would begin their long trek. This is a core historical fact. The coffee trade, originating predominantly from Yemen, quickly evolved into a highly significant and profitable component of the Ottoman economy. The beans would be transported by camel caravan to Mocha, then shipped across the Red Sea, often through Egypt, before continuing overland or by sea again to the major consumption centers like Constantinople, Damascus, Cairo, and Aleppo. Think of the sheer logistics involved: fleets of ships, hundreds of camels, and a whole network of merchants, brokers, financiers, and ship owners, all playing their part in moving this valuable commodity. Fortunes were made and sometimes lost in the coffee trade. The Ottoman state, naturally, was keen to get its slice of the pie, levying taxes and customs duties at various points along these intricate trade routes. This wasn't just pocket change. Coffee became a major source of revenue for the imperial treasury. You can imagine the ledgers in the customs houses, filling up with entries for sacks of kava, a testament to the empire's insatiable thirst. It was the 16th century equivalent of a booming tech stock, only tastier. Back in Constantinople, the economic impact is visible on every street corner. Remember the hundreds of coffee houses that sprang up. Each one of those is a small business, an enterprise that provides a livelihood for the Kavesi and his family, as well as for any apprentices or servers he employs. Multiply that by the sheer number of establishments, and you're looking at a significant new employment sector. Money is changing hands, not just for the coffee itself, but for the rent of the premises, for the charcoal to heat the braziers, for the sugar to sweeten the brew. It's a microeconomy humming within the larger imperial one. And the ripple effect doesn't stop there. The demand for all things coffee-related spurred various crafts and ancillary industries. This is a fascinating, almost quirky tidbit. When you think about it, the rise of coffee culture directly fueled the businesses of coppersmiths, expertly hammering out those elegant sesvies, and potters or ceramicists crafting the delicate finken cups. There would have been artisans specializing in making coffee roasting equipment, or sturdy hand mills and mortars for grinding. You might even have seen specialized professions emerge: individuals who were expert coffee roasters, supplying multiple smaller coffee houses, or professional bean sorters ensuring only the best quality made it to the okak. Even the water cellars, a common sight in Ottoman cities, would have seen an uptick in business, as fresh water was essential for a good brew. It's like suddenly everyone needs a specific type of phone charger, and an entire industry pops up to provide it. Except this charger brews a delightful beverage. But what about the impact on the average patron? Beyond the pleasure of the drink, coffee was, for the most part, an affordable luxury. A few small coins could buy you a cup and a warm place to sit for hours. This accessibility was key to its widespread adoption. However, this also leads to an interesting area of debate. Historians still argue whether the overall economic boom, fueled by the coffee trade, truly translated into widespread prosperity across different social classes, or if its primary benefits were concentrated in the hands of elite merchants and state coffers, perhaps even at the expense of time that could have been spent on other productive activities, as some moralists of the time lamented. Did that janissary, spending his afternoon in the Kavahane, get a pay rise because the coffee trade was booming? Or was he just spending his existing pay on a new, delightful habit while the big profits flowed elsewhere? The influx of this new commodity certainly stimulated commerce and created new avenues for wealth. But it also presented challenges. Smuggling was an ongoing issue, as traders sought to avoid hefty duties. And the very popularity of coffee houses, as we've seen, sometimes led to official anxieties about idleness and lost productivity, which could, in turn, trigger economically disruptive bans. It was a delicate dance between profiting from the golden goose and worrying it was leading the populace astray from proper work. You could say the Ottoman government had a complicated relationship status with coffee. It's profitable, but it's also making everyone just sit around talking, which is also kind of profitable. It's confusing. So that simple cup of dark, aromatic liquid you're enjoying is more than just a beverage. It's a symbol of global trade, a driver of local economies, a source of state revenue, and a catalyst for a whole ecosystem of related industries and professions. From the Yemeni farmer to the Constantinopolitan kaveci, from the copper merchant to the cup maker, the journey of the coffee bean was greasing the wheels of commerce across the vast Ottoman lands, one fragrant sack at a time. You've seen how that humble coffee bean could power a surprisingly vast economic engine, from the fields of Yemen to the bustling Okak in your Constantinople Kavahan, creating jobs and generating revenue for the sprawling Ottoman Empire. You've understood that coffee wasn't just a drink, but a commodity that greased the wheels of commerce. But now, let's shift our gaze from the lira and the ledgers back to the people within those smoky walls. We've called it a motley gathering, a school of the wise. But did this shared space, this common indulgence in the dark brew, truly act as a social melting pot? Did the Kavahani dissolve the rigid class divides of Ottoman society, or did it merely provide a new stage for them to play out? It's a tempting image, isn't it? The idea that a humble coffee house, open to anyone with a few akçe to spare for a cup, could magically erase centuries of social hierarchy? You picture the wealthy silk merchant in his fine furs sharing a laugh with the barefoot porter, the learned Qadi judge earnestly debating a point of law with a common artisan, all distinctions forgotten in the shared enjoyment of coffee and conversation. And in some very small ways, or on very specific occasions, perhaps a flicker of that ideal might have existed. The coffee house was certainly more accessible than the gilded salons of the elite or the exclusive inner circles of the palace. For a brief moment, men from different walks of life found themselves under the same roof, breathing the same fragrant air, listening to the same storyteller. But let's not get carried away with romantic notions of egalitarian bliss. Ottoman society was deeply hierarchical, with clear distinctions based on wealth, lineage, profession, religious learning, and proximity to state power. And these distinctions, by and large, walked right through the door of the Kavahan along with the patrons. This is a key historical fact. While coffee houses welcomed a broader cross-section of society than many other contemporary institutions, traditional respect for rank and status was generally maintained. You wouldn't typically see a high-ranking pasha waiting in line for his coffee behind a group of boisterous sailors. Nor would a simple craftsman casually interrupt a conversation between esteemed scholars. It just wasn't done. Think of it as an invisible velvet rope, always present, even if unstated. Observe the seating, for instance. While the seatier benches might seem to offer open seating, subtle cues and established norms would often dictate who sat where. A more prominent or comfortable spot, perhaps with better cushions, or nearer the warmth of the brazier in winter, or with a better view of the storyteller, would often be tacitly reserved for, or offered to, individuals of higher standing. It wasn't a written rule, but an understood social grace, or perhaps a prudent act of deference. Trying to claim the best seat in the house if you were, say, a street vendor and the Grand Vizier's third cousin twice removed just walked in. Probably not a great career move. And then there's the interesting and rather quirky development of specialized coffee houses. As the trend matured, not all coffee houses remained generic meeting spots for everyone. Instead, some began to cater to specific clienteles, effectively reinforcing social and professional divides rather than dissolving them. You'd find coffee houses known as regular haunts for janissaries, located near their barracks, where the talk was all military discipline and frontier gossip. Others became favorites among theological students and scholars, conveniently close to the great madrasas. Particular guilds or groups of merchants might favor certain establishments where they could discuss business with their peers. Some coffee houses gained reputations for being rather rough and tumble, frequented by a more boisterous crowd, while others cultivated an air of refined gentility, attracting poets and intellectuals. So, your choice of kavahan could itself be a statement of your social standing or professional affiliation. It's like choosing between a biker bar, a university cafe, or a high-powered business club today. So, while people from different strata might technically occupy the same general space, the extent of genuine equal footing interaction is debatable. They might listen to the same Meta or Karago's show, laugh at the same jokes, and collectively sigh at the same bad news, creating a temporary sense of shared experience. There were undoubtedly moments where a clever remark from a commoner might catch the ear of a notable, or where the shared passion for a game of chess could briefly level the playing field. The Mektebi Irfan aspect, with its focus on knowledge and wit, could sometimes allow intellect to shine regardless of social rank. But sustained, meaningful interclass mingling as true equals, that was likely much rarer. It leads to a point where historians still argue whether the shared experience of coffee consumption and the environment of the kavahano fostered any genuine empathy or understanding across entrenched social divides, or if it merely provided a new, more public stage for the subtle and sometimes not so subtle performance of status and hierarchy. It's more likely that the coffee house acted as a fascinating observation deck. You could see how other classes lived, hear snippets of their concerns, observe their manners, all from the relative anonymity of your own small group. It was a window into the wider world of the city, even if you weren't always invited to step through it. So, was it a true melting pot? Probably not. More like a social stew. Perhaps where the different ingredients all simmered in the same pot, sharing the same broth and aroma. But the chunks of expensive meat and the humble potatoes largely kept to their own kind, even as they flavored the whole. The coffee house didn't so much dissolve class divides as make them visible, accessible, and part of the rich, complex, and sometimes contradictory tapestry of Ottoman urban life. You've become intimately familiar with the sights, sounds, smells, and social intricacies of the Constantinople Kavahan. You've seen it as a news bazaar, a school for the wise, a stage for performers, a cauldron of commerce, and a complex arena for social interaction, all under the wary gaze of the Sultan. But this vibrant, multifaceted institution, this unique social phenomenon, was it destined to remain solely a jewel of the Golden Horn? A peculiarity of the imperial capital? Not a chance. Like the rich aroma of its signature brew, the culture of the coffee house was far too potent and appealing to be contained. Your journey now takes you beyond the bustling heart of Istanbul, out into the sprawling towns and diverse provinces of the vast Ottoman Empire. Imagine the seeds of this coffee culture being carried outwards from Constantinople by the very arteries of the empire. Merchants traveling with their caravans to distant markets, soldiers marching to garrisons in far-flung territories, administrators and judges dispatched to provincial posts, pilgrims en route to holy cities, and itinerant scholars or dervishes wandering from town to town. They all carried with them the memory, the taste, and the idea of the kavahan. And wherever they settled or paused, the demand for that familiar brew and the unique social space it fostered began to take root. It's the 16th and 17th century version of a viral trend, spreading not through clicks and shares, but through dusty roads and sea lanes. You couldn't exactly check Yelp for the best kavahan in Anatolia, but word of mouth was a powerful app back then. This is a well-documented historical fact. Coffee houses soon became a common and integral feature of urban life in major provincial centers across the Ottoman domains. From the sun-baked streets of Cairo and the ancient alleyways of Damascus and Aleppo in the Levant, to the bustling ports of Salonika and Smyrna, across the diverse towns of Anatolia, and deep into the Balkans and cities like Sarajevo and Belgrade, the kahvehani established its presence. In fact, some cities, like Cairo, had a coffee culture that arguably predated or developed concurrently with Istanbul's. Though the specific Ottoman style and social functions we've been exploring were certainly amplified and spread via the imperial network. Picture yourself stepping into a kavahane in bustling 17th century Cairo. The air is thick with the scent of cardamom-laced coffee, perhaps a slightly different aroma than in Istanbul. The chatter a mixture of Arabic and Ottoman Turkish, or wander into one in Sarajevo, nestled in the mountainous heart of Bosnia, where the decor might incorporate more local woodwork. And the music drifting from the corner has a distinctly Balkan lilt. The core elements are familiar, the low divans, the small tables, the okak with its bubbling kezvies, but there's a subtle shift, a local accent to the universal language of coffee. And it wasn't just the grand provincial capitals. Coffee houses began to appear in smaller towns, along vital caravan routes where weary travelers could find rest and refreshment, and even in some surprisingly remote administrative outposts. They became essential nodes in the social and communication fabric of the empire, places where news from the capital and from other provinces would arrive, be discussed, and disseminated further. It was a bit like an early franchise model, but without the standardized branding, just the core product of coffee and conversation, adapted to local tastes and conditions. One can only imagine a traveler asking for a complex, syrupy, iced coffee drink in a remote Anatolian village kavahane and receiving a cup of strong, dark, traditional brew with a look that says, "You're not from around here, are you, son?" This naturally leads to the delightful possibility of regional variations, a quirky tidbit to ponder. While the fundamental method of preparing Ottoman coffee was remarkably consistent, local customs surely crept in. Perhaps in certain regions of the Balkans, coffee was almost invariably served with a piece of homemade lokum Turkish delight or a specific local pastry. In the Arab provinces, the blend of spices in the coffee, or the types of dates served alongside, might differ. The stories told by the Meda would likely incorporate local heroes and legends, and the tunes played by musicians would reflect regional folk traditions. Some towns might even have become famous for a particular style of coffee house, or a kavishi renowned for an exceptionally fine brew, drawing visitors from surrounding areas. The best coffee in the empire was probably a hotly debated topic with no clear winner, much like today. The spread of these establishments also raises interesting questions for scholars. Historians still argue whether the provincial coffee houses largely served to project the cultural and political norms of Istanbul outwards, thus acting as agents of imperial homogenization, or if they primarily became spaces for the assertion and flourishing of distinct regional identities and local concerns within the broader Ottoman framework. Were they simply outposts of Constantinopolitan culture, faithfully replicating the capital's trends? Or did they evolve into something new, blending imperial influences with deeply rooted local traditions to create uniquely regional social institutions? The answer is likely a complex mix of both. While they did provide a shared Ottoman experience, connecting diverse peoples through a common ritual, they also inevitably absorbed and reflected the specific character of their local settings. So, whether you found yourself in a grand kavahane in Aleppo, a bustling one in a Balkan trading town, or a dusty outpost on the Anatolian plateau, the essential promise remained a cup of strong coffee, a place to rest and converse, a source of news and entertainment. The coffee house became a truly imperial institution, yet one that was flexible enough to wear many local faces, binding the vast empire together one shared, smoky, caffeinated experience at a time. The Wi-Fi signal definitely didn't reach that far, but the gossip network was fully operational. Empire-wide, you've journeyed with us now across the sprawling Ottoman Empire, witnessing how that vibrant coffee culture, born in those first shadowy corners of Constantinople, spread its tendrils far and wide, adapting to local flavors while maintaining its essential character. From the Golden Horn to the dusty provincial towns, the Kavahana became a fixture, a hub of communication, entertainment, and social life. But, as with all great cultural phenomena, the passage of centuries inevitably brings change. This intense, captivating glow of the classic Ottoman coffee house, Did it shine undimmed forever? Or did it, like the embers in the Cavesi's brazier at the end of a long day, begin to fade, its form subtly shifting with the currents of time? Let's be clear, the Ottoman coffee house wasn't a fleeting fad. For a good 2 to 3 centuries, why, from its explosive arrival in the mid 16th century, well into the 18th and even early 19th centuries, it remained a dominant force in urban social life. The meta continued to spin their tales. Karagöz and Hatzivat still flickered on their screens, and political discussions, whether whispered or boldly declared, still echoed within their walls. The schools of the wise kept their informal classes in session. But as the Ottoman world itself began to undergo profound transformations, so too did its beloved coffee houses. The winds of change were blowing, and they carried new scents and sounds. One of the most significant shifts, a mainstream historical fact, was the arrival and gradual popularization of new beverages and social spaces. Tea, for instance, began to gain favor, particularly in the 19th century, offering a different kind of refreshment and becoming associated with different social rituals, often more domestic, more impactful, especially in cosmopolitan centers like Istanbul. Izmir or Salonika was the slow but steady introduction of European-style cafes. Imagine these new establishments, perhaps with upright chairs and individual tables instead of communal divans, offering newspapers to read, serving Western-style pastries alongside coffee that might even be brewed differently, maybe even with milk. It was a different vibe, appealing to a new, often more Western-oriented urban class. Suddenly, the old Kavahani wasn't the only game in town if you wanted a public place to socialize and sip a stimulating drink. The old-timers probably grumbled. Back in my day, we didn't have these fancy croissants. We had strong coffee and political intrigue, and we liked it. The way people consumed news and entertainment also began to evolve. The rise of the printing press in the Ottoman Empire, though a slow process, eventually meant that newspapers and printed books became more accessible, especially in the 19th century. This gradually diminished the coffeehouse's role as the primary conduit for news. Why wait for a newsreader in a kavahan when you could read about current events in a printed gazette? Similarly, while traditional performers like the Meta and Karagöz puppeteers certainly didn't vanish overnight, new forms of public entertainment began to compete for attention, especially as cities modernized. The stages in the smoke faced new rivals. Now for a quirky, and sometimes dangerous, evolution in certain periods, particularly during times of political instability or heightened factionalism like the often turbulent 18th century, some coffeehouses became even more overtly politicized. You might find establishments that were known as the unofficial headquarters for specific Janissary Ordas regiments, where plots were hatched and loyalties fiercely declared. Other coffeehouses became associated with particular trade guilds flexing their political muscle. Or later, with emerging nationalist or reformist movements. This often made them targets for even more intense government scrutiny and periodic crackdowns. They weren't just places for idle chatter anymore. They could be seen as command centers for specific interest groups. A far cry from the more general, motley gathering of the early days. So, you witness a slow transformation. It's not that coffee houses disappeared, far from it, but their unique, all-encompassing role as the central hub for almost every aspect of male public social life began to fragment. Some might have tried to adapt, perhaps by offering newspapers or new types of refreshments. Others might have become more specialized, catering to a narrower clientele. Many undoubtedly continued in the old style, but perhaps with a slightly diminished vibrancy, a feeling that their golden age was receding. The fading glow wasn't necessarily an extinguishment, but a softening, a diffusion of their once concentrated cultural power. You can almost hear a veteran Kvechi sighing into his kezve. It's not like it used to be. People these days, with their newspapers and their tea, they don't appreciate a good, honest, seditious conversation over a proper cup of coffee anymore. This complex process of change naturally invites scholarly interpretation. Historians still argue whether the decline of the traditional Kavahane's cultural dominance was primarily a result of the irresistible allure of Western cultural imports and modernization, or if it stemmed more from deeper, internal shifts within Ottoman society itself, such as changing literacy rates, new forms of association, and evolving public tastes. Was it a case of external pressures forcing a change, or was Ottoman society organically outgrowing, or at least reevaluating, its old social mainstays? It's likely a combination of both, a complex interplay of global trends and local evolutions. Yet, even as they changed, the image and the memory of the classic Ottoman coffee house, that vibrant, smoky, intellectual, and entertaining cauldron of life, and persisted. It had woven itself too deeply into the cultural fabric to simply vanish. Its legacy would endure, even as new forms of social spaces and new ways of connecting emerged. Setting the stage for the coffee cultures of the modern day, you've journeyed with us through centuries of smoky aromas, hushed conversations, vibrant performances, and the ever-present, comforting ritual of coffee. You saw the Ottoman Kavahan rise from humble beginnings to become the beating heart of urban life, a complex institution that shaped society, economy, and even politics. We've witnessed its fading glow as times changed, new habits emerged, and the world modernized. But as you sit there now, perhaps with your own cup of coffee or tea, you might wonder, did this remarkable phenomenon, this unique crucible of culture, truly vanish without a trace, or do its echoes still resonate in the places where we gather today? In the very way we connect with one another over a shared brew. The classic Ottoman Kavihan, in its original, all-encompassing form, may indeed be a creature of the past. The specific constellation of metas spinning epic tales, Karagöz puppets dancing on linen screens, and janissaries debating state secrets over tiny cups of unfiltered coffee, that precise, vibrant scene has largely receded into the mists of history. Yet, the fundamental idea it championed, the very concept of a public space dedicated to affordable coffee, social interaction, information exchange, and leisurely contemplation, was revolutionary. And that idea, my friend, is very much alive. In fact, you could say those slow unfolding conversations in 16th century Constantinople started a global trend that's still brewing strongly today. Consider this mainstream historical fact: the Ottoman coffee house was a significant precursor to the famed coffee houses of Europe. As merchants, diplomats, and intrepid travelers from the West journeyed through Ottoman lands in the 16th and 17th centuries, they encountered these bustling establishments. They observed their social importance, experienced the stimulating effects of the coffee, and carried the idea back with them. Soon, coffee houses began to appear in Venice, then London, Paris, Vienna, and beyond, each adapting the model to its own cultural context, but all built upon that core Ottoman concept of a public place for coffee and conversation. These European coffee houses, in turn, became hotbeds of intellectual, political, and commercial activity, playing their own crucial roles in the Enlightenment and the shaping of modern Western society. So, in a very real way, the lineage of your favorite neighborhood cafe can be traced back to those early Kavahanis of Istanbul. It's a pretty impressive family tree, originating from a humble bean. And the echoes are not just historical footnotes. You can find them in the very fabric of contemporary cafe culture. Think about why you go to a cafe. Sometimes it's for a quick caffeine fix. Sure, but often it's to meet a friend, to have a business discussion away from the formality of an office, to study or work in a stimulating yet anonymous public environment, or simply to sit, sip, and watch the world go by. That deep human need for a third place, a welcoming neutral ground between the private realm of home and the structured demands of work, is precisely what the Ottoman Kavahani so brilliantly fulfilled. We may have swapped the seedier for an Eames chair and the Sesve for an espresso machine, but the underlying desire for connection and a shared social space remains. Our modern coffee order might baffle an Ottoman Kavachi, a decaf oat milk latte with vanilla syrup and extra foam. Is that even legal? But the human interaction around it would be perfectly recognizable. Even more directly, you can find charmingly quirky remnants of the old traditions in many parts of Turkey and the regions that were once part of the Ottoman sphere. Step into a traditional coffee house in Istanbul's Grand Bazaar, or a local spot in Sarajevo or Beirut, and you might still see Turkish coffee being meticulously prepared in a sezve over hot sand, served in delicate fincans with a customary glass of water. You'll likely find groups of older men engrossed in intense games of tavla backgammon or chess. The click-clack of the pieces a rhythmic counterpoint to their conversations, just as it would have been centuries ago. The pace is slower, the conversations unhurried, a living testament to the enduring appeal of these simple pleasures. The meta might be gone, but the spirit of communal gathering is still palpable. Of course, much has changed. Today's cafes are often filled with the glow of laptop screens and the murmur of individual earbud-fueled worlds. The sheer volume and speed of information available at our fingertips has outstripped even the most efficient Kavahan or rumor mill. Yet, sociologists and historians still argue whether modern cafes, with their often individualized experiences facilitated by personal devices and a faster pace of life, can truly replicate or replace the rich, face-to-face communal discourse and sense of shared public identity that characterized their Ottoman predecessors? Can a Wi-Fi password ever truly substitute for the shared experience of listening to a live storyteller or debating philosophy with strangers who become temporary comrades? It's a question worth pondering over your next brew. But perhaps the most profound legacy of the Ottoman coffee house isn't in the specific rituals or the architectural forms, but in its quiet affirmation of a fundamental human need, the need to connect, to share stories, to exchange ideas, and to simply be together in a welcoming public space. Those shadowy, smoky rooms in 16th century Constantinople didn't just introduce a new drink. They introduced a new way for society to gather, to think, and to dream. And that, in essence, is an echo that continues to resonate in every cup, in every shared laugh, in every quiet moment of contemplation we find in the coffee houses and cafes of our own time. They understood the magic of a pause, a brew, and a bit of banter. A magic that, thankfully, still hasn't entirely faded. Now, as our long journey through the centuries of Ottoman coffee houses draws to a gentle close, allow the soft hum of those ancient conversations to blend with the quiet of your own surroundings. The flickering oil lamps of the past dim slowly, replaced by the gentle glow you've chosen for your own peaceful evening. The rich, dark aroma of countless cups of coffee, brewed with such care and intention by generations of kvesis, now melds into the comforting air around you, a reminder of simple, enduring pleasures. Those bustling, smoky rooms once alive with the murmur of poets and paishas, merchants and mystics, were more than just places to drink a novel brew. They were sanctuaries of shared experience, havens where the human spirit could connect, reflect, and simply be. The world outside those walls could be tumultuous, the Sultan's gaze ever watchful, yet within, for a few precious hours, a different kind of order prevailed, an order built on camaraderie, curiosity, and the quiet ritual of the cup. As you drift now towards your own rest, imagine the last patrons of an ancient kavahan reluctantly departing into the cool night, their minds still buzzing with stories and ideas, their spirits warmed by fellowship. The embers in the brazier glow softly, promising a new day, new conversations. Let that sense of peaceful continuity envelop you. The need for connection, for shared moments, for a comforting space is as timeless as the stars. And in that, there is a deep and abiding reassurance. The stories have been told, the coffee has been savored, and now a quiet stillness descends,